Hi, welcome back. We're on month 8 of the My Magical Garden Quilt Along. This month we're going to applique 2 borders for our beautiful applique quilt. If you're ambitious, you might want to applique all 4 borders, or maybe you've decided not to applique any borders at all. I appliqued my top and my bottom borders because my quilt was going to hang in quilt shows quite often. So I thought it was a beautiful way to finish this quilt with the top and bottom borders appliqued. However, when this quilt is on my bed, you don't necessarily see the bottom border, and even the top border might be hidden by the headboard and the footboard. So you might choose to applique the 2 side borders instead. Or some of you might want to applique all 4 borders. Last month we made our half square triangle border to go in between the applique blocks and the applique border. There is a half square triangle border on both sides of that applique border, and you can see I've been busy here making all of my half square triangle borders, and they're all ready to go on the quilt. Next month we're going to assemble the applique blocks, the 2 half square triangle borders, and our either non-appliqued or appliqued borders, our 4 outside borders. Over the past 6 months, we have been using our Leaves Galore and our Hearts and More tools to make all these beautiful applique shapes, and we're going to be able to bring back some of those shapes from previous months and use those again in our applique border. If you have previously cut those shapes, the charts in this month will help you gather those together and remind you what we need for our borders. If you haven't cut those shapes yet, go ahead and refer back to the months where we cut our different shapes. The only new shapes that we're cutting this month are our 2 small pomegranates, and we're going to cut fresh vines with both the 8-inch and the 6-inch curve so that they're nice and fresh and ready to applique rather than using some that have been hanging around for a while. So let's get started with cutting, and then we'll assemble our applique borders. We've gathered all the pieces together for our border from our pre-cut 2.5-inch leaves, 3-inch leaves, S and Z curves, etc. If you did not pre-cut these pieces, the instructions tell you where to find the instructions in the different months to complete those pieces for the border. So our charts do include these shapes. The charts are there to help you gather all the pieces. All of the shapes should be pre-cut in the previous months, except for our vines and our pomegranates. Starting with the centers of the pomegranates, we're going to take our very small rectangles and we're going to fold those in half the long way, this way across the 1 inch. So we're making them a 1/2 inch long, 1/2 inch wide. Then we're going to use template B, the large end from 40 to 40 on the fold. Now, when I'm using my templates, I don't really pay attention to which side is up, but it's easiest to read the markings if you can read the Hearts and More logo. And here's my 40-degree marking, and there's a 40-degree marking over here. Place those 2 40-degree markings on the fold, and we're cutting out with our 28mm rotary cutter. Now let's do that for all 4 of our pomegranate centers. That gives us a very small little leaf shape. And these little leaves are great for any of your miniature quilts, small quilts where you just need a small applique leaf. The end of each Hearts and More tool gives you 4, 5, even 6 different leaf shapes that you can make. So you can see how quickly we're getting all 4 of those cut from those little rectangles. And now we're ready to make our pomegranate circles. The pomegranates on the border had to be much smaller than the ones in the quilt. So we're using template A, the large end from 90 to 90 to make a 1 5/8 inch circle for our pomegranates. Now these fabrics are a little bit large. Your fabric's going to be 2 inches. We had these 2.5 inch pieces cut, so we just went ahead and used what we had. But in the instructions it says to cut these from a 2-inch square. So your fabrics will look a little bit smaller than mine if you're wondering why I have so much space around that circle. So that's a little wasted fabric. But I'd rather waste fabric than time, and I already had the squares cut, so we're just using what we have. Okay, so we've cut our pomegranates. Let's just check those. One of those I felt was not quite a full circle. So if you have something that doesn't look like a full circle, go ahead and test it out. Put your tool over that circle and see where it's sticking out. Then you can just clean up that little bit along the edge. I was just going too quickly and I didn't create a pretty circle. So now that you have beautiful little circles, you're going to match up your colors to see where the best contrast is. So this purple is a pretty good match to this one. In other words, we can see this color on here pretty well. And this one goes on here pretty well, but let's swap them out and see what we like best. I don't have a lot of contrast in my purples. The stitching will help to differentiate the center of the pomegranate and the background color. But what if I don't like those at all? I have 5 different purples to work with. Go ahead and swap those out. These are just blending too much for me, so I'm going to go ahead and swap those out with a different color. So this is what I want to emphasize, is you have to like your quilt. If you don't like the way they go together, feel free to always swap those out. We've got plenty of fabric, so make sure you like your choices before you go ahead and fuse these down. So I'm going to redo these 2 centers to find a color that shows up better. Here, I found some leftover color 10 leaves that we're not going to be using in this quilt. So I'm going to recut those centers from those 2.5 inch leaves that would have been left over anyway. And we're just going to fold those right down the center and do the exact same thing we did before. Template B, large end from 40 to 40. This color is going to give me a much better contrast to the outside of the pomegranate. Yeah, I like that a lot better. So let's do a second one, and then we'll be ready to move forward. Okay, I'm going to press those on my applique pressing sheet now that I have some colors that look good to me. We could even replace this one here with this one if I like that better. I think the darker one looks best. Good, we're ready to go. If you are running low on your fabrics for the vines, you can use any greens that you have left. You don't need to follow the diagram or the picture as far as your colors go. You're going to look through all of your scraps of green and see what you have the most of. The same goes for your 2.5 inch leaves, your 3 inch leaves, even your S and your Z curves. Use the pieces that you have pre-cut. Your colors do not have to match the original quilt because the border was just a mishmash of all of our leftover pieces, and you can do that too. I'm pulling out all of my previously cut pieces from making vines of all different sizes. I can probably get 2 vines out of that piece. I definitely can. So let's go ahead and use this piece once again to cut our long vines for the border. I might just want to iron that out on my applique pressing sheet to make sure that it's nice and flat before I start cutting. And we're going to line up our 8-inch tool with that cut edge. We'll probably want to recut just a sliver just to get rid of any roughness that's along the edge, and then slide over by 3/8 of an inch and cut again. Here's an opportunity if you want to do a 24-inch long vine. My board isn't big enough, so I'm going to fold it in half, and I'm going to make sure that the fold lands right on the A here on my tool. If the fold is not on the letter A, your vine is not going to be symmetrical. So I do like to use that A on my tool as the center point of the vine when the fabric is folded. And then we're going to use these leftover pieces, and let me gather some leftover pieces of my other colors. We need lots of 6-inch little side shoots off of our main vine. So I'm just gathering any fabric here that was either cut with the 6-inch curve or the 8-inch curve. These look to be all 8-inch curves, so I'm going to stack those right up one on top of the other, at least 4 layers at a time. What we need now are 6-inch segments. So I've cut my fabric to be 6 inches wide, and now I'm going to use my 6-inch tool, and I'm going to make some vine segments for my borders. These are just offshoots from the main vine, but they don't have to be the same color as the main vine. I like to have all my colors represented, so I've stacked up 4 of my greens, and I'm going to cut several side shoots from each one. Now this is a spot where you can use up all those leftover pieces of vines from your other project, but if they look like mine and they're just in a pile like this, they're going to be hard to work with. So I'd rather start fresh and get a nice flat piece of fabric to cut those vines. Feel free to also have on hand a couple of 4-inch curves. Those they help you turn more quickly in your vine. Instead of stretching these 6-inch pieces around a tighter curve, I would go ahead and cut a couple of 4-inch segments, and those come in handy for those little drop flower areas where we're using the concave and the convex drop flowers or bell flowers. And those little purple bell flowers or drop flowers. Those are awfully nice on these really curvy stems. So let's go ahead and cut those in half so we have a couple of 4-inch segments as well. It just gives you more choices. Now, if you want to go literally by the book and by the layout diagram, you're not going to need all these pieces. But what I like to do is just have fun with this border, make it your own. You don't have to follow my diagram exactly. Now let's get started assembling the borders. Today we have cut out our 4 borders from our border fabric, and we did not cut those to length yet. We've cut them to the correct width, which is 8.5 inches. From there, I've gone ahead and I've marked the center of each border with chalk. And once I find the center of my border, I'm also going to find the center of my layout diagram. Now the layout diagram for the border is the finished size in the width of that border. But don't be concerned about the length yet. We're going to leave it full length. We're not going to cut this border down to the right size. The only thing that we're going to do is cut the right width, and then we're going to tape together the layout diagram. The border does need to be centered on your fabric. The printout is 8 inches. Your fabric is 8.5. That way you have a 1/4 inch seam allowance on both sides. Now, oftentimes I do not have you print out the entire layout diagram, But the border's a little different. Because there's so many pieces that all have to come together, I do like to have the layout diagram full size. Now you could put this layout diagram under your border if you feel your border is light enough and you can see that diagram right through. But many of you, and on my original quilt, I used this Tim Holtz fabric that was much busier, and I was not able to see the black lines through that fabric. So one of your options is to use a product called Transdoodle. Transdoodle is a chalk-backed paper. It comes in a package with 3 different colors. You're going to get 4 sheets of white, 2 sheets of yellow, and 2 sheets of blue Transdoodle in this package. I like using the Transdoodle so I can transfer my design onto the fabric using a pen or a pencil. We're simply going to put the Transdoodle under our pattern, and I'm going to use the yellow Transdoodle here. Now yellow I'm always leery of because in the marking world, yellow chalk and other yellow marking pencils are hard to get out, but this Transdoodle removes very, very easily. But I'm going to show you my secret for using the Transdoodle so you don't even have to worry about getting those markings out. For my vines, I'm going to use a dull pencil so it doesn't have a sharp point on it that might go right through your paper. Now the nice thing about the Transdoodle is the Transdoodle brushes away, and it does not set with heat. So you can mark with the Transdoodle on your fabric, iron these pieces in place, and your markings will not get set with the iron. But you can see what I'm doing here. I'm only marking the center of each applique patch. So my applique is going to cover over that line anyway. Now when you peel this away, you've got your yellow markings, and we can start laying out these borders. Now I like to do both borders at the same time. It's easiest to line them up on your ironing board, and doing 2 at a time, you'll get them to look more similar to each other than if you do each one separately. Using my applique placement diagram under my applique pressing sheet, I have pre-assembled some of my elements for my border. We've put together our flowers, our pomegranates with the tops, we've done our buds, and all the different styles of the buds. Now we've made 2 of everything. That way we can assemble both borders. The way I approach the borders is to find my centering line, and I'm going to lay out both borders on my ironing board. I'm going to take my 2 tulips first, and I'm going to lay out those tulips right on that centering line that I've marked on the border. Right here, there's a centering line. And I'm using the chalk lines that I had drawn from the layout diagram just to give myself a feeling for where to put that tulip. Keep this placement diagram handy so that you can try to follow the layout diagram as well. And you're going to keep a pair of little scissors handy as well, because you're going to need to just clip these vines and tuck them up under the leaves as you go. And you're going to use all these little vine segments over here to add the little vine segments coming off the main vine. So I'm going to use all my different colors to have the little vines and side shoots coming off the main vine. Now you can see there's a pomegranate here and here. I'm going to leave that off for now. I can just put them out there as a placeholder so I can see what they look like, but I'm not going to fuse those yet because I want to get my vines and my leaves fused first. So we're just going to use our own eye to decide what colors we're going to put for our vines and our leaves. And then we're going to use the pre-assembled buds that we have and place those on. So I do like to do a dry fit here, just to make sure I'm happy with the placement of all of my vines and leaves. I'm not infusing down any of these flowers until later. Now, after I have all of the vine segments and all of my leaves placed as I'd like them in the border, then I'm going to make sure I'm tucking up under all of my ends, and I would remove these flowers and just press the leaves and the vines in place as we have in our blocks, so it's easier sewing when you only have your green leaves to sew. So here we are. We have our 2 borders for the kit version of the quilt up on the design wall with just the green elements fused. And we're going to stitch all those green elements, and then we'll add all the colored elements, and our borders will be done. Have fun making the borders this month. Our project is almost finished.